So, Mark, thank you for joining us. Could you tell me and Claudia about your journey in, a bit about yourself and your journey in your career path, sports sponsorship?
Yes, no, that's great, and lovely to be with you both, Imogen and Claudia. So I left school quite a long time ago. I left Stowe, and I actually, after uni, I went to I fell into the newspaper world. Actually, I was more on the sort of the advertising, marketing side in the world of newspapers and magazines. Some of the big moved on from the Observer newspaper to some of the big magazine groups, including Reader's Digest and Hearst magazines, who publish a lot of the leading women's titles, Home Interest, that sort of Harper's and Queen. I was on that title as ad director, etc. But it was actually almost like, I'm going to say, an accident that took me into the world of sponsorship and sport. But what it was actually a long time ago. It was the Millennium Dome, which became the O2. But it was the Millennium Dome. It was opened up for the Millennium, the year of 2000, as a great big exhibition. This wonderful tent in Greenwich that hopefully you're aware of now as the O2. And I worked on that in the build up to the Millennium in the sponsorship team. So that took me into the world of sponsorship, and we worked on some great brands like Tesco, McDonald's, what have you. Very exciting because it had this sort of big drop-down deadline date of had to open on New Year's Eve, and it was an extraordinary event. The Prime Minister, the Queen, everyone was there, so that was fun. But I went. That gave me the good base to go into sports sponsorship rather than return to the world I was in. And I literally just wrote actually to. I loved athletics. I was very involved at Stowe as captain across country. Very involved in the athletics team, ran for my county and things. Loved it, and I just wrote to a guy who was very sort of well known in our circles called Alan Pascoe, who was a bit of a guru in the world of athletics, former British team captain, and he was single-handedly saving British athletics because they'd had some financial issues, but he took them onto the BBC, all the big events, and brought in a big sponsor, Aviva. So I wrote to them. It was a young company that started up called Fast Track, and I joined them, and it was some great people working with. And I was with them for about 11 years actually. So it became Chime Sports Marketing, and has now become Wasserman, just to give you the names. But it's one of the world's leading sports sponsorship agencies. But it started off literally. It was about 8 of us in the room, and some great people. So I worked really closely, shared an office with the chap who's now the chief executive of World Athletics, John Ridgeon. So some great people. Learned a lot from Alan, and did some great deals in the build up to the London 2012 Olympics. So all of that period, we were working on British athletics and other Olympic sports like basketball, triathlon, and doing sponsorship deals. So working on behalf of what we call the rights holder, the actual the body, the sports body. Worked on things like the UK school games that you might be aware of, with great brands like Visa and Sainsburys. So all of that sort of stuff, the schools athletics championships. And then stop me if I'm going on too long, but then I'm just giving you a whistle stop tour of how I got into it all, which is just literally by writing in the end. But I had that base of, being involved in sponsorship, but it was moving more into the sports world and showing that, what was good was I understood club structure. I was a keen club runner. I still am a member of Thames Hare and Hounds, the oldest running club in the world. We just had our annual dinner on Saturday. I understood the structures of the sport, grassroots to glory, we called it. So, and this agency was steeped in the world of athletics. So that was a good entry point really for that. But I then joined the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow, which was held in 2014, and I worked from there from the beginning of 2011. Lived in Glasgow and in London, and that was a great experience to work on a big multi-sport games. Do you know, I'd always had this love of the Commonwealth Games. I remember there was a project at Stowe where you could win, I don't know whether it still exists, you could win a funded trip somewhere. I can't remember the prize, but I entered it. Do you know the one I mean?
The McElwee Award, yeah.
And anyway, I didn't win it, but I think I came second. But I had a funded trip to go to see the Commonwealth Games in Canada at the time. So, but I've always loved it, and it's great fun to work on that event. Hopefully, you know it. So we did about 50 deals, £45 million in sponsorship. You know, and some great athletes there, and the friendly games, great to have a village and all that sort of stuff. And then I went to an agency called the Sports Consultancy, and I headed up what we call rights marketing, which is what I do, sports sponsorship, rights marketing it's called. And I headed that up, and again won British Athletics. But alongside that, London 2017, which was the World Athletics and the World Para Athletics, 21 days in the Olympic Stadium in London, and worked on that. We raised, you know, with a year to go, we did very well, raised £1 million there just in terms of national deals. So great fun. And I did the Muller deal. So Muller was a major sponsor of British Athletics for 7 years, and I worked on that all the way through. And actually the start of it was a year we did a deal with Team GB, which was for the Rio Olympics. And then on the back of that, built the athletics deal. So that took me through to then I did 4 years at Rocket Sport, which is part of Elton John's group of companies. He actually has a sports company, would you believe? Worked in that, and again worked on athletics, but actually brought in the LTA, British Tennis, and worked extensively on the tennis properties that the LTA run, including Queen's and other things. So that was good. And then I've been doing my own thing for the last couple of years. So I'm now the Winning Tape, which is hopefully a relevant name, the Winning Tape. And I work, you know, again, in similar things. I work on major events. I was embedded in the World Indoor Athletics Championships last year. Was staged in Scotland. I've also worked overseas, like the USA on the World Championships over there, the outdoor championships. But athletics. I also, interestingly, did the World Orienteering Championships as commercial director. A little bit different, but it was great fun to be involved in that world. A bit different, very strong in Scandinavia. That was held in Scotland and Edinburgh. Great locations. And I'm working in snow sport at the moment, which is interesting. I've been on a big call with them today. And also a bit of finally, I'm coming to the end of it now, a bit of a departure for me. I'm working on a sort of social impact project, so the grassroots. And this is in Southwark in Bankside in London, where they've got a wonderful sort of large space in the shadow of the Shard, which is the big tower block there with offices, very glitzy, you know, the Shangri-La Hotel. But right in the shadow of that is an open space for what is quite a deprived part of London. And, you know, there's 91% of the area are flats, so there's no access to open spaces. And there's this wonderful land that was left by the Duchess of Marlborough, you know, based in Blenheim, down the road from you, in the 20s, that was left to be preserved for recreational use for the people, the community. And they do a fantastic job, this charity, run this space and other open spaces in the area. And we're now doing a big build on this land, a pavilion, a state-of-the-art sustainable build, and I'm helping them with all the sort of profile and fundraising on that and things. So we've got a corporate games coming up, all sorts of things. I announced today Joma, the sports brand Joma involved, so that's great. So that's I hope that was a very long answer, but that gives you a preamble. And going right up to date, so I have my sort of day job, if you like, the Winning Tape, with myself and associates work on this. And then I'm also a board member. I'm going back to the Commonwealth Games. I'm on the board of Team Scotland, and we are the host nation for next year's Commonwealth Games in Glasgow. So we're standing in for Australia, who handed the games back because of financial difficulties. We are standing in at short notice and staging the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow next July 2026. So I'm working on the board of that, and I'm on the board of Scottish squash as well. Do a lot in Scotland, so live between Scotland and London, and that's so I'm very involved in those bodies up in Scotland, and also still involved with athletics. I'm vice chair of the British Athletics Supporters Club that does a lot for the sport, and I've just been over to the European Indoor Athletics Champs in the wonderful Netherlands in Apeldoorn. So hopefully that brings you up to speed. Final thing, during the Olympic Games in London, I was also on the board of GB Taekwondo, just to throw in another sport there, who won gold in London for the first time. So I'll take a breath there. Does that answer the question? I think so.
Yeah, thank you.
So Marc, what would you consider to be the key lessons and skills you learned, particularly from your early career, but also from maybe later on in your career?
The key learnings, you're saying, yeah? Yeah. Do you know what? I think it's really important to get on with people, actually. It's this thing is all about relationships, because you know, I get calls from people I'd worked with years ago to do things with them again. So if you want longevity in this sort of profession, you know, because it is actually quite a young person's thing industry. So, you know, if you want to have longevity, I think those relationships, those working relationships are so important. And it's very important to remember that, and this is good advice, I think, you know, just remember that never leave anywhere, you know, always leave things on a good note, and keep those relationships for the future. Don't make enemies, you know. And I think that's so important in this sphere, but probably for all spheres. Try and get on with people. I mean, I've led teams at those agencies I talked about, and you know, it's about getting the best out of people. Everyone's very different, and I think you know, see those differences and harness them, and don't expect everyone to be in the same model as you. You know, same, but actually, you know, really work those personal relationships is my biggest advice, I think, because it is actually a little bit of a dog eat dog industry. There can be a lot of people, you know, fighting a bit, and it's important just to try and be affable, find your way through on that, like that.
Thank you.
So if I were to go into the sports sponsorship pathway, do you have any top tips or insights in securing multi-million-pound deals such as the Muller partnership?
Yeah. Do you know what? It's all about those relationships again. So I mean, I met the marketing director for Muller at a marketing society dinner. So for me, networking is really, really important, and making the effort to network. You know, sometimes you just don't feel like it. You know, you've got to go to a function or something, but actually it's really important, you know, exchanging business cards and getting on with people. And I sat next to this chap at a dinner in 2012 in Manchester. We got on really, really well. We kept in touch, but it wasn't until, you know, we kept in touch, but I had to have the right opportunity for him. And the Commonwealth Games I was working on at the time wasn't the right thing. But as soon as I started working on Team GB for Rio, helping with that, I went to him, and he could see the sense in it, and we got into a great partnership for the last year of the build up for Rio Olympics as Team GB, supporting that as the official yogurt. So, you know, it's all about, you know, you're not going to necessarily do a deal straight away. I think it's about keeping those relationships. And he always says that what was, you know, why he quite liked me was that I took a real interest in the product. And it wasn't just trying to do a quick deal. You know, I actually took an interest in what he was trying to achieve. And very importantly, actually, for people who do my job, bringing in sponsorship deals, is to keep in touch afterwards. And because actually the delivery of those deals, sometimes which you're not involved with, you see, because you do a deal and sort of, you know, that's your focus. And we often have teams who implement the sponsorship and who activate it. But keep interested throughout, you know, and, you know, keep that relationship going so that you can. So I ended up doing all the renewal deals and doing other deals with him. We got him involved in European athletics and other stuff. So I think it's about being genuinely interested in what their objectives are, and almost wanting to see the best. So you're acting on behalf, although you're being paid by the rights owner, the sports property, you know, you're acting, I think, in the interest of the brand, actually, a lot of the time.
Okay. What was the most difficult contract you had to negotiate, and why did you find it so difficult?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots. I mean, do you know what? One of the problems is that it can take months, and you sometimes you get a yes, and then actually getting the contract, all sorts of fresh points come up and fresh people get involved. I'm just trying to think of the most challenging one. I did a deal with Ineos to promote the Daily Mile, as I say, in the US staged World Athletics Championships in 2022, quite recently. And it just took forever to get across the line, to get the go-ahead. And then one of the challenges was this is all about signing up, you know, getting schools involved in the States with this Daily Mile program. I don't know whether you know it. It's a wonderful program for primary schools. But they wanted to broaden it out to the US, and they own this program. And by the time we got the deal done, people realized that the US terms break up earlier than the UK ones, and so we had a real tight deadline to activate the sponsorship before the World Championships in July, because the challenges after the World Championships, you know, the feeling is that then the events happen. So it's all about the build-up. So I would say that getting timing right is really, really important, and to try and make contracts as simple as possible. Often these legal companies get involved and they really drag out. I mean, some contracts have taken forever. And I mean, I have to tell you another one is that this is going back in time, but do you remember 9/11, that terrible disaster in America, the Twin Towers? But I had a big sponsorship deal about to sign, and because the company involved had a big exposure to the US, they pulled out. And so that was, obviously it was a terrible situation because you had this terrible situation in America. So one had to be empathetic, clearly. I mean, there were far worse things going on than the sponsorship deal falling over. But this particular deal at the time was for the grassroots of athletics, would have made a real difference to clubs up and down the country, young people. But they pulled out because of the, a lot of companies just got really concerned after 9/11 and just buried their heads in the sand, wouldn't want to do things, So that was another tough one. But often I would say the most difficult bit is once you get the no, is then getting the contract done. In speed, and my advice is to try and launch it as soon as possible, and try and agree at what's called a heads of terms. If you can announce a sponsorship, it's not going to then fall away. So do it almost try and announce on a heads of terms, then you can do all the detail later. The bigger the deal, the more complicated contracts there are.
So in a sponsor deal, what is generally expected from the sports person or the team in return for the funding?
Yeah, and it's a really good question. And this is another point you see on the contract, because often the sales part of the equation, if you like, we go out there all enthusiastic, and then when it comes to it, you then got to nail down that actually the team, will deliver these number of appearances. There will be this amount of inventory around at the events. But you touched on, I mean, one of the most difficult things is nailing down individuals. So, so I'll give you an example. So with the Muller deal, they wanted to have the images on yogurt packs up and down the country in supermarkets. And we said, yes, we're allowed to give because we're working for British Athletics, the British team, we're allowed to have 3 athletes. There's a 3-athlete rule that you're allowed to have 3 athletes on a pack as part of what they're meant to do for their lottery contracts. They get money from the lottery, and that they have to give they have to give their images, as long as it's in a group setting of 3 or more, they have to do that as part of their deal. Right, so that's in their agreement. But then these athletes have their own agents as well, who have a slightly different view and try and push the envelope a bit about what they can do and push the barriers. So we said to Muller that they would have the right to have images on these yogurt pots. But when it came to them actually picking the athletes they were going to use, there were all sorts of difficulties, and the agents were trying to say, "Oh no, we want extra money for that," But we'd obviously said, "No." So nailing down, because you've got lots of parties involved, so it's really important to be really clear with athletes. I would suggest from the funding agreements with the team body, in return for lottery money, you are expected to do this. I think it's really important to nail that down, and I think too often that's slightly glossed over. What they're expected to do. So you're right. I mean, sponsors expect appearances. They expect image rights to a certain extent of team members. Now, what happened with Muller is that they realized that actually it became they wanted a good relationship with these athletes. And if they were doing it and they felt a bit annoyed because they weren't seeing the money was going to the federation. So Michael at Muller ended up doing individual deals with people like, Laura Muir and people you may have come across, some of our big names at the time. And that's what happened. So to maximize them, and what happened, he then did television ads and did use them in the ads, and that worked really well. But he ended up having to pay extra money for them directly to the athletes. So yeah, it does come down to the contract, nailing down exactly what the expectations are from the people you're signing the contract with and the other people involved.
And so obviously you mentioned how the athletes had to, or on the Muller partnership, had to be on the cover of the yogurts. Was there anything similar about how were there any rules or laws that you had to comply with where securing the sponsorship may have been a bit difficult?
Yes, well, yes, absolutely. I'll give you an example. So, and by the way, brands get really confused about all this, you see, because they don't know all the ins and outs. But Team GB, which is the Olympics, so every 4 years, when all these teams, triathlon, swimming, they go to the Olympics, they become Team GB, and they go as one team, which are all kitted out by Adidas, I think now, and so it's different. So whereas Nike is the kit for the British athletics team for World Championships for Europeans, when they're competing just for the sport. So one of the things we need to be fully aware of, and you need to educate the sponsors on, is the whole rules around what they can say around the Olympics. Because if you sponsor British athletics or British swimming or British fencing or whatever it is, there's a period around the Olympic Games when you have to be careful about what association you're doing. Because as I say, when they get on that plane to Rio or Los Angeles in a few years' time, they become one team, Team GB, and their rights are protected, if you follow me. So that is a really tricky thing you have to navigate. Now, the federations, the governing bodies, work with Team GB to try and persuade them to relax the rules. And with Muller, we did get a relaxation of the rules because Muller was putting so much money into British athletics year round. And that's the key. It's year round. Because if you think about it, if these brands are helping these teams prepare for all the 4 years cycle leading up to the Olympics, and then they can't say anything about the fact they've made it all possible, supported these athletes through thick and thin. It's a real issue. So we have actually managed to there's been a bit of relaxation now. If you're a long-term partner of one of the national governing bodies, you can talk about your involvement in the Olympics. But you have this whole clash of categories. You see, the British Team GB had Danone in the end. Danone, which is a big yogurt company, overseas yogurt company, they had them as a sponsor, which obviously is a clash with Muller. So you can see the issue.
So what are some things I can consider in securing sponsorship in netball if I want to take my career further?
What are the things that you should consider about sponsorship to take your career further? Okay.
Netball career.
We do what?
If I want to yeah.
Netball. Oh, right. So what in terms of seeking sponsorship or doing?
Yeah.
Ah.
Seeking sponsorship.
Oh, I see. Yes, because I see. Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. And I'm meeting with an old Stoic lacrosse player next Friday, actually. You might know who it is. Having a coffee just to sort of have a chat about all this because, yes, it's interesting. So when I was at Rocket Sport, we did get involved. I did get involved in personal deals, but up to now, as you can tell, it's all been very much big events and teams rather than individuals. I think individual sponsorship is a different ball game. One of the challenges, of course, is that sponsors, I think, there's a risk, isn't there, with personal sponsorships? Because if you don't, do you have any sponsors now, by the way?
No.
But if someone signed with you for a 3-year deal and you got injured, you see the challenge there. So, and I think what a lot of personal sponsorships do have you write into a contract uplift. So if you win, if you're on teams, if you achieve this, and if you achieve medals, netball is fantastic. It's in the Commonwealth Games, isn't it? And so there's so many different sort of KPIs, let's call them. So I think you'll find that a sponsored deal will be lots of bonus payments. So events trigger it, how high they can go, But there is that risk of the trying to get a sponsor to invest in you. But I can see the importance of trying to get personal sponsorship. I think a lot of it also, by the way, local contacts, so where you live or where you're based, are very important. So often people can get like car deals with a local dealership. It's quite a popular one, and then you talk about your community and where you live, and that you're putting something back into the community, and they see you as a real ambassador for your area. So I think that geography thing is quite important. I don't know where you live. And did you say you're a member of a club, didn't you, as well? Are you?
Yeah, so I live in Milton Keynes and I play for MK Dons.
Oh, right. Wow. Well, that's a great team, isn't it? And do some of your colleagues, so I'm asking you now, but do some of your colleagues do well with individual sponsorships?
I don't think there's only one girl, a goalkeeper in my team who is getting sponsored, but I'm not really sure about the logistics of it and what's actually going on.
Yeah, yeah. And obviously the kit deal and all that. And, you know, I mean, look at Emma Raducanu, what she's done is quite extraordinary. And obviously one of the slight pitfalls is that once she won the US Open, you know, there were so many demands on her time. I mean, it's one of the reasons cited why she hasn't really maintained that level, you know. So, you know, it comes back to actually that point you raised earlier, which is be careful what you sign in terms of commitments, you know. It's really important. We've got a great star in athletics now, Keely Hodgkinson, and I know that her agents are very, very protective because at the end of the day, you know, she needs to be training every day, not doing commitments for sponsors. So there's a difference between image rights, but even then it needs filming, it needs, you know, all of that. So it all takes time, appearances, to, you know, be at places. So I think you have to be very careful. I think I saw a good interview with her, actually, Keely, where she talked about at the end of the day, keep focused on the prize, which is what's more important for her is to win medals and to be the leading woman in the world stage, you know. And if you put that first and then everything else has to fit in, it's quite a good philosophy, you know. So keep focused on the sport. But you obviously do. It is good. It is good to. I mean, is that something you're quite focused on, trying to bring some sponsorship deals in for yourself, or not really?
Not at the moment, no. But I just thought it'd be a good question to ask for, like, in the future.
Yeah, and that's, sorry, it was netball, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's fantastic. And is there a pathway? Can you see a clear pathway to like the England junior squads, England squads, and things? Is there a?
Yeah, there is sort of like a step. So currently I'm playing regional level.
Yeah.
And then it sort of goes Super League level and then England.
Yeah,
so,
and the Super League, by the way, is doing really well, isn't it? They had a great launch this week. Fantastic. I think they're really going places at the moment. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So I have one question. So, you know, obviously you mentioned that you sponsor or you secure sponsorship for across multiple different sports.
Yes.
Is the process of doing that different with each sport, or is it quite similar, do you think?
Yes. I've always focused on Olympic and Commonwealth sports. So, you know, the sports like athletics and swimming and triathlon and taekwondo, which are actually, because the world of football is actually a bit of a different world, actually, and I would say probably easier, but there's real, you know, I used that phrase dog eat dog earlier. There's a lot of competition and a lot of, you know, people in it. So I've tried to make myself a little bit of a niche in these sports, which has worked quite well because I do get quite a few approaches about helping in that sector because it's not, but the money obviously isn't as big as in football. So that's, you know, but I would say in terms of approaches, you have to work a lot. You have to work harder in these, what let's call them, the second tier sports. You have to work a lot harder, and you have to be quite creative. And I think it's also, you know, it's all about values to a certain extent as well. It's about matching values of your sport, like netball, with the values of a sponsor. I mean, the great deal with Vitality and netball, you know, I know the guy well. You know, it's about matching those values and having to work harder about articulating the return on investment. Because with football, so, you know, if you go to sponsor Man United or bad example, you know, they're not doing so well, but some of the ones, Liverpool, whatever, you know, you see the eyeballs. There's so many eyeballs around the world, so they can do huge deals by being seen on television, basically, and digital media, you know, across the globe, and fan engagement. But whereas if you're not on television week in, week out, you have to work that much harder and be more creative about how you can have that relationship with the followers of that particular sport. So I'd say that's one of the big differences, if you like. And you know, and every sector's different. Culture is a whole different ball game. I mean, I'm working right now, as I mentioned at the beginning, on what we call a social impact project, which is really quite regional, quite about an area of London, you know, and that's all about the relationship with those companies that work there and the people in that community, and it's finding like heroes who grew up from that area and having, you know, so it's all about tying down. It's almost hyper local, but actually because it's quite a wealthy area of businesses, you know, you can hopefully make those connections, you know.
So I've got one more final question, and then we'll go to Claudia's final question. So my final question is, out of all the brands you've worked with, what was your favourite?
Ah, yes. Well, it has to be Muller because of the longevity of it and the relationship that I built with the guy that became a great friendship actually. And I've been doing some careers talks for him. He lectures to a uni actually, so we've been doing that a bit similar. And he's gone somewhere else now, which is interesting, you know. But so the Muller relationship, because it started in that dinner, you know, and you walked into that dinner not having any idea that would happen, that you'd meet someone who, you know, that's given me the most satisfaction. But I do enjoy becoming friends with the people I've dealt with. So another one is the Ineos chap, you know, Ineos, the Daily Mile, has become a great personal friend. And he came to my birthday party the other day and stuff like that. So, you know, and I think, you know, working with Olympians as well, you know, I wasn't an Olympian myself, but I've been so privileged to have made great friends, you know, who are athletes, you know, and I think it's fantastic. So I've really enjoyed working, I think, athletics, because it was in my blood. Going back to Stowe, let's take it right back to the very beginning there. You know, it was in my blood. There's long cross-country runs at Stowe, you know, and to now be sort of rubbing shoulders with the likes of people like Sevco and stuff, it's great, you know, and Steve Cram, and you hear their stories and stuff, and you know, you feel, you know, you feel, you know, part of that, and actually, sorry, to make a difference, you know, that's the thing, is making a difference. So at the end of the day, bringing in money to send people to the Olympics and realize their dreams, I mean, that's great. That gives you a great satisfaction. So I'm sure one could earn a lot more in things like law or the city or something, but actually, you know, working in sport, you know, making a difference for teams and well-being. We haven't really talked about well-being, but it's so important to inspire young people to be active, you know, that is so important. And I know Stowe does an amazing job on that, you know.
And just our final question for you. How did you find your time at Stowe?
Oh, I loved it. I had two big things I did really, which was drama, fun enough, and running, athletics, and those are the two things. I think there is actually quite a good link between the two somehow. There's often you often find that the athletics has people who like acting. I think it's the drama of the stage and all that. But I really enjoyed Stowe. It was a wonderful place, and I enjoyed it. Do you know what, more each year as you went on? So my favourite year was my last year, but I loved the camaraderie from both the sport, the house, you know, and the school teams, and also things like the house events were fantastic there. The house sports days and stuff. We did the athletics and I captained that. But then the camaraderie and drama I really enjoyed as well, and working to a fixed deadline. You know, I think both of them actually have a common theme about working to a deadline. You know, with races. So and putting on a big play. So I was in the played quite a role with the Congreves and the junior Congreve and the senior Congreve. You know, and so those were my great memories, and I've enjoyed keeping in touch with Stowe. I love coming back every year for the old alumni cross-country race, sports day. I was on the committee for quite a while, helped with some of the preparations for the centenary. So, you know, I really enjoy keeping in touch with the school. It's a great school, and it's great to see how it's developed. It always lifts my spirits when I come up. You turn that corner. It's great, isn't it? Whether I felt that when I was being dropped off by my parents, you know, it's a lot different these days. You have a lot more, you know, get out and breaks and things. I think, you know, when I started, I think I don't even know whether we had half terms, actually. I don't remember them. We were sort of locked in for the whole term. So we used to look forward to, my wife always says, I always look forward to Christmas and Easter. And it's because of being a boarding school. So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you for coming on and answering our questions.
Thank you, Imogen. Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.